The Great Emu War, when Australia's military faced off against flightless birds. In the annals of military history, there are tales of epic battles, heroic stands, and strategic masterpieces. And then, there's the Great Emu War of 1932. This is not a joke or a myth, but a genuine military operation in which the Australian government deployed soldiers armed with machine guns against a most unusual enemy: large flightless birds. In the drought-stricken farmlands of Western Australia, thousands of emus were wreaking havoc on crops, pushing desperate farmers to the brink. The solution: call in the military. What followed was one of history's most bizarre conflicts. A month-long campaign that would end in embarrassment for the Australian forces and unexpected victory for the emus. It's a story of man versus nature, of hubris and humility, and perhaps most surprisingly, of the remarkable adaptability of these native Australian birds. Join us as we explore this peculiar chapter in Australian history, where the mighty Lewis machine guns of war were turned against feathered foes, and where, against all odds, the birds emerged triumphant. Historical context: Australia after the Great War. To understand the Great Emu War, we need to step back and examine Australia in the aftermath of the First World War. The young nation had paid a heavy price in the conflict, with over 60,000 Australians killed and many more wounded. As the surviving soldiers returned home, the government faced the challenge of reintegrating these men into civilian life. Their solution was the Soldier Settlement Scheme, an ambitious program that offered returned servicemen parcels of land to establish farms, particularly in Western Australia's wheat belt. The idea seemed perfect on paper: honor the veterans by giving them a fresh start, while simultaneously developing Australia's agricultural potential. Thousands of former soldiers, many with no previous farming experience, took up the offer and moved to remote areas to begin their new lives. The government provided some training and financial assistance, but it was far from adequate. These men and their families faced harsh conditions, isolation, and the daunting task of transforming wild bushland into productive farms. By the early 1930s, these soldier settlers were already struggling. The Great Depression had hit Australia hard, sending wheat prices plummeting. Many farmers were barely subsisting, heavily in debt, and under immense pressure to produce successful harvests just to survive. The Western Australian wheat belt, where many of these settlements were located, was marginal farming country at the best of times, semi-arid, with poor soil and unpredictable rainfall. Then came the drought of 1932. As crops withered in the fields, the desperate farmers faced yet another challenge, one that would prove to be the final straw for many. From the interior of the continent came thousands of emus, migrating toward the coast in search of water and food. These large, flightless birds, standing up to 6 feet tall and capable of running at 30 miles per hour, discovered the settlers' wheat fields and water supplies. To the starving emus, the farms were an oasis in the desert. To the struggling farmers, the birds were an existential threat. The emus trampled crops, damaged fences, and consumed what little wheat had survived the drought. Even worse, the damaged fences allowed rabbits and other pests to enter the fields, causing further destruction. For the soldier settlers, many of whom had survived the horrors of trench warfare only to face this new enemy on their own soil, it was too much to bear. They needed help, and they turned to the government that had placed them in this precarious position in the first place. Their demands were simple: send in the military to deal with the emu menace. The problem: emus invade the wheat belt. By late 1932, the situation in Western Australia's wheat belt had reached crisis point. An estimated 20,000 emus had migrated from the inland deserts toward the coast, directly into the farming districts. These weren't small birds. The emu is Australia's largest native bird and the second largest bird in the world by height. Standing up to 6 feet tall and weighing around 90 pounds, they moved in large flocks, consuming and destroying crops with remarkable efficiency. The emu's natural behavior made them particularly destructive to farms. They traveled in large groups, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, moving across the landscape in search of food and water. When they discovered the wheat fields, they found an abundant food source. A single emu could consume a substantial amount of wheat, but the damage went far beyond eating. As they moved through the fields, they trampled young plants, their powerful legs crushing the crops. Even worse, they damaged the rabbit-proof fences that protected the fields from Australia's other great agricultural pest, rabbits. For the soldier settlers, many of whom were barely surviving economically, the emu invasion was catastrophic. Their livelihoods depended entirely on successful harvests, and with the Great Depression in full swing, there was no financial safety net. Many farmers had taken on significant debt to establish their properties, and now faced ruin. Their frustration was compounded by the fact that emus were protected under wildlife laws, making it illegal to conduct large-scale culling without government approval. In October 1932, a delegation of ex-soldier farmers traveled to Perth to meet with Sir George Pearce, the Minister of Defence. Their request was unprecedented but reflected their desperation. They wanted military assistance to combat the emu invasion. Specifically, they asked for machine guns and soldiers to operate them. The farmers argued that their status as veterans entitled them to government support, and that the scale of the problem required military intervention. To the surprise of many, Minister Pearce agreed. Perhaps influenced by the farmers' status as fellow veterans, or perhaps seeing a public relations opportunity, he authorized the deployment of military personnel and weapons to address the emu problem. The decision was not without controversy. Some officials questioned whether military resources should be used for agricultural pest control. Nevertheless, the operation was approved, and Australia prepared for one of the most unusual military campaigns in its history. Military response: Operation Emu. On November 2, 1932, the military response to the emu invasion officially began. The operation was placed under the command of Major GPW Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. His force was small but, on paper, formidable. 2 soldiers armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The Lewis gun was no ordinary weapon. It had been used extensively during World War I and could fire 500 to 600 rounds per minute. Against human enemies, it had proven devastatingly effective. Surely, the reasoning went it would make short work of large, flightless birds. The operation had multiple objectives: to cull the emu population, to collect specimens for the Western Australian Museum, and, perhaps most importantly, to boost the morale of the struggling farmers by demonstrating that the government was taking decisive action. There was also an element of scientific curiosity. The military wanted to assess how many birds could be killed with each round of ammunition, essentially conducting a live experiment in efficient pest control. The media was invited to witness the campaign, with newsreel cameramen accompanying the soldiers to document what was expected to be a swift and decisive victory. The presence of the media would later prove embarrassing as events unfolded in unexpected ways. Minister Pearce, who had authorized the operation, faced criticism in Parliament, with one senator sarcastically asking if medals would be issued for the campaign. Nevertheless, the operation proceeded with a sense of confidence. The soldiers established their base of operations near Campion, in the heart of the affected farming district. The plan was straightforward: locate concentrations of emus, approach within range, and open fire with the machine guns. The birds were large targets, moved in groups, and had no natural fear of humans. Victory seemed assured. Major Meredith reportedly predicted that, with modern weapons and a bit of practice, it shouldn't be too hard to wipe out the lot. As the soldiers prepared for their first engagement with the emu enemy, few could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. The birds that had survived for millions of years in one of the world's harshest environments were about to demonstrate remarkable adaptability in the face of modern warfare. The Great Emu War was about to begin in earnest, and it would not go according to plan. The battles: feathered tactics versus firepower. The first engagement of the Great Emu War took place on November 2, 1932, near Campion. Major Meredith and his men had spotted a group of about 50 emus and prepared their ambush. The soldiers positioned themselves strategically, set up their Lewis guns, and waited for the birds to come within range. When the emus approached, the order was given to open fire. The machine guns roared to life, their sound echoing across the wheat fields. But what happened next astonished the soldiers. Instead of falling in large numbers as expected, The emus scattered in all directions with surprising speed and agility. The birds split into small groups, ran in zigzag patterns, and maintained a distance that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Despite the firepower brought to bear, only a dozen birds were killed in this first encounter. The soldiers were bewildered by the emus' unexpected tactics. The second day brought even greater challenges. The soldiers located a large group of approximately 1,000 emus and set up their guns on the edge of a dam, hoping to ambush the birds when they came to drink. This time, they waited until the birds were in close range before opening fire. But after just a few rounds, the Lewis gun jammed, a mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. By the time the weapon was operational again, the emus had scattered beyond effective range. Only a handful were killed. As the days passed, the emus seemed to adapt to the presence of the soldiers and their weapons. The birds developed what appeared to be sophisticated defensive strategies. They began posting sentries, individual birds that would stand on high ground and watch for danger while the main group fed. At the first sign of humans or vehicles, the sentry would alert the others, allowing them to flee before the soldiers could set up their guns. Even more frustrating for the military was the emus' remarkable resilience. The birds could absorb multiple bullets without falling. Major Meredith later reported with grudging admiration that the emus could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. He noted that even when seriously wounded, the birds could still run at high speed, making it difficult to confirm kills. After a week of operations, the results were dismal. Despite expending considerable ammunition, fewer than 200 emus had been killed. The birds had proven themselves masters of evasion, demonstrating an uncanny ability to avoid the soldiers' best efforts. On November 8th, just 6 days after it began, the first phase of the operation was called off. The military withdrew, regrouped, and considered a new approach to the seemingly insoluble emu problem. Aftermath, retreat, and return. The initial withdrawal of military forces on November 8th was not the end of the Great Emu War. After the first unsuccessful campaign, Major Meredith and his men regrouped and developed new tactics. They had learned valuable lessons about their feathered adversaries and were determined to achieve better results in a second attempt. On November 13, 1932, the operation resumed. This time, the soldiers adopted more mobile tactics, mounting their machine guns on trucks instead of fixed positions. They hoped this would allow them to pursue the emus more effectively and counter the birds' speed and evasion tactics. The results showed some improvement. Over the next 10 days, the soldiers reported killing about 200 emus. However, this was still far short of expectations and barely made a dent in the estimated population of 20,000 birds. By November 16th, Major Meredith claimed that his men had killed 500 birds with 2,500 rounds of ammunition, an efficiency of 1 bird per 5 bullets. While this was presented as progress, it was hardly the decisive victory that had been anticipated. The operation continued until December 10th, when it was finally terminated for good. The official report claimed that 986 emus had been killed with 9,860 rounds of ammunition. However, even these modest figures were disputed, with some observers suggesting the true number was much lower. The farmers, understandably, were disappointed with the results. The emu population remained largely intact, and the damage to crops continued. In desperation, they petitioned for the military to return again in 1934 when another emu migration occurred, but this time their request was denied. Instead, the government introduced a bounty system, offering rewards for emu beaks. This approach proved more effective over time, with farmers reporting the killing of approximately 57,000 emus between 1945 and 1960. For the soldier settlers, the aftermath of the Emu War was grim. Many abandoned their farms in the years that followed, unable to overcome the combined challenges of drought, economic depression, and wildlife incursions. The soldier settlement scheme, which had begun with such high hopes, was increasingly recognized as flawed in its implementation. The veterans who had survived the trenches of World War I found themselves defeated not by human enemies, but by the harsh realities of the Australian outback and its resilient native fauna. Legacy and cultural impact. The war that lives on. The Great Emu War may have ended in 1932, but its legacy lives on in Australian and global culture. What was initially an embarrassing military failure has transformed over time into a beloved piece of Australian folklore. A quintessentially Australian story that captures the nation's unique relationship with its environment and wildlife. In the decades following the operation, the Emu War gradually faded from public consciousness, remembered mainly as an odd footnote in Australian history. However, with the rise of the internet and social media in the 21st century, the story experienced a remarkable resurgence. The image of Australia's military being defeated by flightless birds proved irresistible to online audiences, spawning countless memes, jokes, and references. The Great Emu War became a viral sensation, introducing this bizarre historical episode to a new global audience. Beyond its status as an internet curiosity, the Emu War has inspired serious artistic and cultural works. Books, documentaries, songs, and even video games have been created based on the events of 1932. The story has been featured in museums and historical exhibitions across Australia, recognized as a uniquely Australian historical episode that reflects the nation's character and challenges. For historians and ecologists, the Emu War represents an important case study in human-wildlife conflict and the challenges of agricultural development in Australia's harsh environment. It highlights the tension between European farming practices and native Australian wildlife, a tension that continues to this day in various forms. The failure of the military approach to wildlife management stands as an early lesson in the complexity of ecological interventions. The emus themselves have thrived in the decades since the war. Today, Australia's emu population is estimated at 600,000 to 725,000, and the species is listed as of least concern conservation status. Emus remain an iconic Australian animal, featured on the nation's coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. Another native species that has often found itself at odds with agricultural interests. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Great Emu War is how it has become a symbol of nature's resilience in the face of human technology and hubris. The image of sophisticated machine guns being rendered ineffective against primitive birds carries a powerful message about the limitations of military solutions to ecological problems. In an age of increasing environmental awareness, the Emu War serves as both a humorous anecdote and a sobering reminder of humanity's complex relationship with the natural world. Conclusion: birds of a feather, victorious together. The Great Emu War of 1932 stands as one of history's most unusual military campaigns. A brief but remarkable episode where Australia's armed forces faced off against native wildlife and came away humbled. What began as a straightforward pest control operation evolved into a lesson about nature's resilience and the limitations of human technology. In the final analysis, the emus won their war through superior tactics, remarkable adaptability, and sheer numbers. Their victory wasn't just a quirky historical footnote. It represented the triumph of millions of years of evolution over the relatively recent development of human warfare. The emu's ability to post sentries, scatter strategically, and withstand multiple bullet wounds demonstrated intelligence and survival instincts that the military planners had severely underestimated. For the soldier settlers of Western Australia, the failed campaign was another blow in their already difficult struggle to carve out a living from the harsh landscape. Many would eventually abandon their farms, defeated not by human enemies as in the Great War, but by drought, economic hardship, and yes, large flightless birds. The soldier settlement scheme, while noble in intention, had placed these veterans in an untenable position, expecting them to succeed where even the military's machine guns had failed. The Great Emu War reminds us that history isn't always about grand battles between nations or ideological struggles. Sometimes, it's about the unexpected, the absurd, and the humbling moments when human plans go awry. It speaks to Australia's unique character, a nation that can look back at this peculiar defeat not with shame, but with a wry smile and a sense of pride in the tenacity of its native wildlife. Perhaps Major Meredith summed it up best in his report when he noted with grudging respect, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." In the contest between man and emu, the emu had proven itself a formidable adversary indeed, one worthy of its place on Australia's coat of arms and in the annals of unusual military history. As we reflect on this strange chapter in Australia's past, we're reminded that sometimes the most memorable lessons come from our most unexpected defeats. The Great Emu War of 1932 may have been lost by the humans involved, but in its retelling, it has won a permanent place in our collective imagination.